I'm not sure what to say. That was astonishing. Thank you. Fortunately, I don't have to, because we have a panel here today that are going to discuss this issue in a lot more detail. So let me introduce our panel members. First of all, our moderator is Dr. Makon Fardis, who is a clinical psychologist and member of our counseling team. Makon brings to our unit, and soon to all of you, a deep understanding of the dynamics of domestic abuse that comes from both his clinical and academic background. He received his medical degree from the Mashhad University of Medical Sciences in Iran, and his doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Montana. Prior to joining us at the bank, he practiced at Georgetown University and the University of the District of Columbia, and he maintains a private practice in Washington. He is also a board representative for the Institute of Contemporary Psychotherapy and Psychoanalysis in Washington. Tali Sadan is a domestic violence and sexual assault therapist at the Women's Center in Washington and a survivor of domestic and sexual violence as well as stalking. During her work with the Women's Center, she created a curriculum that speaks to her clients' strengths and engages their resiliency. Tali offers trainings to groups from various professions that focus on the relationship between domestic violence and mental health issues, as well as ways of helping members of the community better understand and normalize mental health issues. She is a member of the DC Victims Assistance Network and its Mental Health Subcommittee, as well as the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence's training work group. Neil Irwin is the Executive Director of Men Can Stop Rape, which seeks to mobilize men to use their strength for creating cultures free from violence, especially men's violence against women. Well known throughout the country in the field of gender-based violence prevention, Neil currently serves on the Department of Justice's National Advisory Committee and is a member of the Novo Foundation's prestigious Move to End Violence initiative. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland's School of Public Health and has been a regular lecturer at American University, George Washington University, and Howard University. So, Makon, over to you. I think we have about half an hour. Is that right? I think so. Okay.
Is everybody awake and alive? Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. This was really powerful. I stayed glued to my seat as I was listening to you, and very moving. One of the things that was striking to me personally was the stark contrast that I think exists between genders as far as who seems to be the perpetrator and who seems to be the victim. I was hoping maybe, Neil, you would tell us a little bit about what happens to young boys, I think, as they set out to be young men and adult men, and how do they become that?
Sure, thank you. And like you said, Mark, I thought it was great to hear. I think it is important. I'm glad that we have some men here, and it's always, when we started as an organization 20 years ago here in D.C. and now working nationally and internationally, you wouldn't even see the few men that are here in the room. So it's good to see, and I think we need to congratulate the World Bank and others to know that this is an important issue that needs to be a part of everyone's everyday life. And so when you ask, where do boys learn to be men, not only here domestically but globally? What are the traditions, the cultures, the behaviors, the attitudes that shape how boys perceive what is acceptable for their interpretation or presence as a man? And unfortunately, what happens for us, and a lot of the work that we do in primary prevention, intertwines what we call dominant stories and counter stories. These narratives that boys know and are socialized in, that teaches them very narrow understandings of their social emotional development, right? It tells them that as a boy, you can only show a few emotions. You have to disconnect and ignore the rest of those emotions. And you develop a pattern of behaviors that are monitored by other boys and adult men and adult women and other girls that says if you step out of that pattern of socialization, you are somehow less of a man and you will be a target for other men and women and boys and girls' violence. And so as boys, we learn really early, stay on track. Do what we're told our culture tells us is acceptable for being a man. And many times, unfortunately, that's intertwined with a lot of self-destructive and harmful attitudes and behaviors that impact them for the rest of their lives. And so for us, the impact of engaging boys we believe our work is from conception throughout the lifespan. and that we want to regularly model for boys what healthy masculinity looks like. We want to increase their social emotional intelligence. We want to give them muscle memory and practice around empathy and sympathy and compassion. As Mark said, if you can see it in one person, if you know one person, then you can do that for a broader group of people. And so what happens, unfortunately, is that we don't see domestic violence in the news, but we are entertained by it. It's television programs, and as Mark said, it existed before there was a TV. But now it's been ratcheted up in the lives of our young people and our boys particularly, and so they are now comforted, entertained by expressions of patriarchy, misogyny, heterosexism, homophobia, and it is unexamined. And so our work is about trying to help boys look critically at the lessons and the messages they're getting about who they are as men and support them as adult men in their lives, trying to role model the behaviors and attitudes that we think promote positive social interactions, high IQ with their social emotional intelligence, and really prepares them to be allies and community members for us all for the remainder of their lives. And so that for us is what is important around. We're not beating up on men when we talk about the violence that we as men perpetrate, but we're being honest about what we think masculinity is capable of in terms of mobilizing and being allies with our female peers to prevent violence against girls and women.
Wonderful, thank you. Tali, you work at the Women's Center. What kind of people come to you, and how do people even know that the type of relationship that they're in is in fact abusive?
That's actually a great question. People come to us through DC's very robust network of agencies that are there to help people who are victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, as is Neil, part of that network. And part of what oh.
You turn it on.
Push. Oh, sorry.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, good. Sorry about that. So when people come to me, they typically come for issues regarding domestic violence or sexual assault. But something that you said, Mark, really caught my attention, which was how do people actually know that they are in domestic violence relationships? And the reality of it is that most people that do come for therapy come for many other issues. They may come for eating disorders, unhappy in my marriage, unhappy with my career, lots of other presenting issues. And very often you find that under all of those is a relationship with abuse, whether it's directly in a relationship that's abusive or having grown up witnessing abuse, like your niece and nephew, unfortunately. But all of us are affected by that. So 1 in 5 may experience it directly, but I feel so many more people experience it indirectly, and I think could have just as much of an effect on them as well. I personally grew up witnessing it, but in not in a violent way, but just a very mild emotional abuse, control. I don't know if any of you have heard of the example, the term gaslighting, which is kind of making you feel like you're crazy, making you feel like you're losing your mind. So witnessing that, and just like men may be socialized to believe that this is what a man behaves as, this is how you are as a boyfriend, as a husband, us women are as well. So I learned this is what it means to be a woman in a relationship. Being submissive is okay. It's okay, it's good. And okay, I'm not arguing with that, but it's very easy in abusive relationships to fall into submitting to control and becoming so emotionally vested that relationship is everything. That's the air you breathe, it's everything that motivates you in life. So the clients that come to me may not realize that the relationship that they're so emotionally vested in is abusive. My job is never to tell anyone to leave their significant other. Never. I will never tell a client of mine, you have to leave. As many of you know, it may be even more dangerous when you do leave. But my job and the job of our team at the Women's Center that work with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault is to teach you a healthier relationship with love. And when I say love, I don't mean just romantic love, but love for yourself, love for what it is you do, love for your children, for your pets, for your career, for anything that you live for, what healthy love means. And so that's the project, the mission of the Women's Centers program, is to help redefine that. And in doing so, when you develop a healthier relationship with love, the answers will come to you about your own relationship.
Wonderful, thank you. I just wanted to remind the folks who are watching us on web stream that the questions that the country offices might have can be in fact sent to us via email. As later in the day we open the floor for questions for the audience and also for the country offices, please feel free to email the questions to DA Prevention, that's Delta Alpha Prevention at worldbankgroup.org. We will be taking questions from country offices as well as the audience on the floor here. Neil, I wanted to come back to you. It sounds like, I think what you were saying a little earlier is that we as men grow up with a certain set of standards, and those standards aren't always inclusive of kindness to other people. One thing that comes to mind is that, well, is there an alternative, healthier type of being a man? What is healthy masculinity?
Sure. I mean, I think the challenge is, and as an organization, we would never go into, based here in Washington, D.C., and having worked in all 50 states, about 8 countries internationally, and we regularly get to receive delegations from the State Department, the United Nations, to, as was spoken of earlier, many different countries trying to prioritize this work. We would never say that there is one definition and men can stop rape has the answer. Mm-hmm. But we do think there's some characteristics that are connected to what are expressions of what ultimately becomes our humanity. We're talking about, again, this social emotional intelligence. We're talking about gender equity. We're talking about seeing the intersections of class, privilege, race, homophobia, heterosexism, and trying to have a lens with which you can understand it first as an individual, right, from socio-ecological model, right? You want to look at how it is impacting you. You want to think about the relationships first in your life. You want to then think about your community and the larger society. And so at a macro and a micro level, we think that there are elements of a young person's own development that we need to lift up more around, as I said earlier, empathy, sympathy, compassion, self-esteem. We know that the protective factors and risk factors in young people's lives, the more nature, nurture, and environment, the more nurtured in a healthy environment you are, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to develop on track. You're not experiencing abuse, you're not witnessing substance abuse, you're not witnessing physical harm, you're getting good nutritious food to eat. All those things speak to youth developing in a really powerful way. Now, if you're compromised because you're witnessing abuse, you're compromised because you're being abused, you're compromised either directly or in some subsequent way, that's going to restrict how people start to develop their own kind of survival instincts. And we know that then that young person finds himself in a relationship. Mm-hmm. And if you've survived in abusive relationships, you may continue to survive in an abusive relationship and see it as uneventful. This feels normal to me. And so I think what we, again, try to really emphasize with the young people that we work with, and when I say young people, we start, this summer we run summer camps. Our young people, we had a camper who was 5 years old, and we run programs on college campuses with being run by our graduate students as well. So when we talk about the conception throughout the lifespan, it is at each developmental stage a different type of intervention that really tries to lift up the power of masculinity in a positive way that allows them to express it as uniquely themselves, individual to their own kind of passions and beliefs, but to see it as a resource to the relationships they're in and the larger community they're a part of. And so that's a long answer to say we don't think there's any one way, but those foundational pieces of your own emotional intelligence and recognizing your responsibility for not only your own development, but its impact on others. We think what we have seen in the work and the bit of evaluation that we've done with our young people, their self-efficacy, their belief that they can do something in their community to be involved is increased significantly. We're seeing the benefits across the board in our students, not only, especially the school-age students, in school attendance, school performance, but their ability to involve their peers in behaviors and in interventions that promote healthy relationships. So whether it be romantic or platonic, they recognize that in all of those relationships, they have a bystander responsibility, and they feel good about it. It feels they are entertained and they are joyous about saying they have a role in how they shape their own masculinity. And that is the thing that sustains it. And if this room was in some of the environments here in D.C., School Without Walls, you may know, right down the street in George Washington University, our Men of Strength Club members, which is our youth program, exist on those campuses. Some of them are officers here at the university. Many of them are running community strength projects in their school, engaging their peers in the area. And so just 2 blocks away from us, there's an expression of young people, young men and young women, working on these issues that will sustain them when they show up on a college campus or enter into a romantic relationship for the first time. The last thing I'll say, 18 years you've been entertained by violence, and now you find yourself in a relationship on a college campus, and you want to live out all of the things that they tell you you're supposed to get to do when you go to college. Well, understanding anger or shame or embarrassment or guilt or this first time to have some kind of sexual expression, and we've been told by the media that what you're supposed to do is get her in the mood. You're supposed to romance her, right? Gone with the Wind, he tells Scarlett, you need to be kissed and kissed hard, right? And the next morning, Scarlett wakes up in the bed, right? And she's eating breakfast and she's all happy. And there's a civil war going on outside the door. So I think it's just really important to know that there's probably no one answer to your question, and yet there are multiple ways and multiple approaches, as the World Bank is exhibiting, where we can all take better care of one another.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. One thing that I noticed as important, almost like as a running thread between the comments of everybody, is what if somebody comes of age, grows up in an environment which is less than perfect? It's somewhere where a person essentially has either been abused themselves or witnessed it. And this question might be for all of the panelists, for everybody essentially, to what happens to that person? What choices do they have? If it's a male, they might see almost like as part of their development to act a certain way. And if it's female, for them to be recipient of certain type of behavior and accept it.
I think people may be interested to know that my former brother-in-law lost his mother when he was 10 years old, under suspicious circumstances, actually. Without going into too much detail, she died of an overdose of pills, and her husband was a pharmacist. My sister believed that her husband's father killed his mother and told me that before she herself was murdered. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but I do know that he grew up in a very masculinized family with a father who was an Army colonel and a brother and a sister who, by all accounts, was not treated as well as the boys and sort of insisted on being a more, I guess, masculine way. I do know this. I can only speak from my own experience, but I do know statistics show that often the abusers are children of abusers. And one of the reasons why I told this story is because I really want to focus not just on the survivors of domestic violence, but absolutely on their children. Domestic violence is child abuse. This judge is wrong. And it leads to generations of violence. And so it's very important to me, and that's actually one of the major things that I learned and made me so angry that I wrote a statute and ran for office and want to try to make laws to stop that.
Well, I'll chime in here. One of the most interesting part of my clinical work is when I meet with clients and we do a genogram. So we're going to map out your family history, but we're not going to just look at who parented whom, was married to whom, but we're going to look at patterns of behaviors, patterns of mental health, patterns of relationships. We can actually look at how many tense relationships there were between different people in your life. And the reason it's such a powerful tool is this is where so often I see people having that aha moment of like, oh, so I knew that person was abusive and I knew that person was abusive, but I didn't realize that the entire side of my family, there was abuse. And I didn't realize that maybe on this side of the family, a lot of them were victims of abuse or abusers. And it's such a powerful pattern. And I would say pretty much every single one of my clients has experienced abuse in their family, or grandparents or aunts and uncles. They've seen it as becoming a normal behavior. So again, going back to rebuilding a relationship with what healthy love is, and that it's not about that power and control, that it is about really accepting people. So one of the examples of a very common statement I get from clients, well, no, I don't like when he does this, or I don't like when she does this. Okay, that's very common. We all have significant others or friends that we just don't like it. But when it becomes an issue is when you really try to change the other person. You're really focusing on changing the other person. Or you're really relinquishing parts of who you are in order to make that other person happy. So this is where it's a very thin line between, okay, this is just a relationship issue, and this really is abuse. So educating people, and like you were saying earlier when you spoke, talk about it. Come out of the closet about it. Make it known. I have people in my life who have said, okay, well, why do you talk about your own personal experience? It's important. It's important because so many people, when I do speak about it, say, me too. Or, for example, a support group that I recently started for survivors. We started our first session a few weeks ago, and we went around, we introduced ourselves, and one young lady I work with her individually as well, she said, she was the first one to say, this is who I am, and I'm a survivor. All of a sudden there was silence because everyone else said, I go to this school, this is where I work, and yes, I'm here for a survivor group, but I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to talk about it. And she said it. She was the youngest one in the group, and she said it. She had to leave early, and after she left, everyone kept bringing up her name and saying, well, when she said it, it gave me courage to say. So don't wait for someone else to say it first. Say it first.
Could I chime in here? I know it's your turn.
Sure,
I think feminism taught everyone 50 years ago and continuing today that the personal is political, that what goes on in your life does matter and does affect people. And one thing I'd really hope that we could change socially, and it's going to have to come socially because it's not something you can pass a law on, is I want to stop victim shaming. And in fact, one of the first words I want to get rid of, honestly, even though I just said it, is victim. I love the word survivor. It's a much better word. A victim is someone who's being oppressed. A survivor is someone who has gotten past that and is taking charge of their own life and is a strong, powerful person. We speak of Holocaust survivors, not Holocaust victims, because the victim, you think of the perpetrator. The survivor, you think of the person who's coming through it. So I love that. And just real quickly about survivor shaming or victim shaming. If your house is burgled, very few people say, well, why didn't you get an alarm? They say, I'm sorry, that's horrible, that's terrible, you must feel really violated. When a woman is raped, all too often comes, well, what were you wearing? Well, why were you drinking? Well, why were you with that guy in the first place? Women have a right to wear as sexy clothing as they want, to drink as much as men, and to socialize just like men do. Damn it. And it's not the survivor's fault she was raped. It is never the survivor's fault she was raped. She should not, even though I know she does, she should not feel ashamed. It's not her fault. He should feel the shame, not her. And so I realize it's a personal decision, but I do encourage everyone to come out. Because the more people know that other people like you exist, the more we can all bond together to do something about it. I read a statistic, a shocking statistic. 90% of rapes in the United States of America are done by men who have raped before. That means that if we can encourage people to come out, and to prosecute these bastards. And one of the things I want to do in Virginia is more rape kits and more forensic tests and more beds for victims of domestic violence to escape from. This is all part of the things I'm running on. But if we can prosecute these people, if we could speak out about these people, if we'd stop feeling shame as survivors, we could stop 90% of rapes in America. That's an amazing statistic. So yes, please, I know it's painful. I didn't want to come out, and it didn't happen to me. It happened to my sister. But the more we come out, the more we share our stories, the more we empower everyone. So I wanted to add that.
Well, I think it's important, and I want to build, I think Mark, you said earlier, it has to be a social thing. It has to be, and we got laws now that say you're not supposed to kill and rape people. And so I don't know if we're going to be able to lock our way through incarceration. But if you do look at my children were amazed that we were looking at an old movie and they saw someone smoking on an airplane or an elevator, and they were amazed that the people were even smoking, let alone inside. Okay? And if you think about if you think about drunk driving, there were some immediate consequences that we all knew. And so I don't know if you can legislate it the same, sexual assault and domestic violence in the same way. But I do think there is a accountability that may help change, that social contract around domestic violence and sexual assault. And yet I also want to put forth, there are laws now that say you're not supposed to do these things, and yet the rates are what they are. And so for us, I think about Mark talking about this judge. For all I know, this judge himself was either a perpetrator or a survivor of some form of abuse as a child, and now they find themselves in a decision-making position, and their interpretation in their professional role has no understanding of healthy relationships, domestic violence, sexual assault, and there are things within our judicial system that need to change, as Mark is working on, and others as well, and yet there are elements of it that do put forth accountability and hold us all. We recognize when you go through that sobriety check, you better be sober. And that is a cultural shift that happened relatively fast. And so what can we leverage in this field? And this is a great space to be in the World Bank for the strategies that you all implement in so many different disciplines globally. What insights can you bring, not only for this program that is around internal, but it makes my job easier when I go to places today and say, we're at the World Bank, who emphasizes and prioritizes this in such a way that their staff is now prioritizing, taking out of their day. Makes our job easier in our advocacy work and every day. And so there's obviously lessons to learn from your all's leadership on this and for the length of time you've been doing, and for you all to be even more present in communities' lives to speak, particularly for some of the men who are in this room. Your authority, your leadership, your stature within this institution makes it a lot more visible, a role that we as men are supposed to be playing in our daily lives around this work.
I'm truly grateful for the comments and your thoughts. This has been a treat. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I wanted to open the floor for questions.